Okay, guys, sorry. I was rambling about no taxation without representation, how it was like a slogan or like a popular cry. So basically, it just meant that they weren't going to keep sending money to Britain unless they were somehow formally represented in Parliament or, at the throne. So you probably heard of a couple like famous rebellions that had to do with this. The Boston Tea Party was one where British ships came in to the port with tea, and settlers went aboard, dressed as Native Americans, might I add, and then threw all the tea overboard. And then there was the Stamp Act, which essentially said that any sort of legal document that was going to be sent or approved, marriage licenses, deeds to houses, things like that, would have to have a paid for British stamp. So that was something they also rebelled against. And then lastly, kind of the last line that was drawn in terms of what they were willing to take, the settlers from Britain, was as they were kind of rebelling against these acts and the British tea tax and stuff like that, King George stationed British soldiers in the colonies to just like kind of serve as a threat. Like, okay, you want to get rebellious? Well, I'm going to just put this group of soldiers here in your town to quarter and kind of just watch and keep things in order. Obviously, the settlers did not like that, and thus the revolution began. Okay, so in 1775, patriots, that's what they called themselves, they staged an attack on the British at Lexington. So that was the first battle, and the Revolutionary War had begun. So at this time, not every settler is a patriot. There were settlers called loyalists who wanted to stay either like neutral or at least loyal to the king. They felt that trying to break off on their own was too much of a risk. So not everyone in the colonies is fighting for freedom the way the patriots are. George Washington, though, is probably one of the most influential founding fathers at this time. He leads the American Continental Army. So at first, this is very, very weak. The Continental Army is disorganized. It relies heavily on militia, which is basically like untrained farmers with guns and pitchforks that are making up the military, essentially, compared to the British, who have one of the strongest militaries, particularly navies, in all of the world at this point. And then, as I mentioned before, not everybody is on board with this. So not only is Washington and his men up against, the British, they're also trying to, keep themselves safe from loyalists who are showing resistance as well. So really, all of this and how bad it was from the get-go should have resulted in a loss for the colonists. Like, there's really no way that if you were to be studying their war tactics, they should have won. But obviously they did, because we're the United States of America and we are not sitting around drinking tea and talking with British accents. So there were some advantages. Number one, these people lived here for a very long time, so the terrain, like the grounds, were to their advantage. They were able to use that and kind of like set out different tactics based on the land to help them progress, because obviously the British soldiers wouldn't have known the land the way we did. And then also, super, super key important here, is we had foreign help. The French and the British had just got done fighting a war, trying to take over parts of northern, what is now the United States, but also Canada. So the French are super pissed at Britain, and they're going to come to our defense. Like, they're going to help us because they're mad at Britain. And then also, like, another thing I like to just mention is there's something to say about just like the will to fight when you're fighting for freedom, as opposed to the British soldiers who are fighting for essentially nothing. I mean, if you were a British soldier and you won the war, your life was going to stay the same. But if you were American or a colonist and you win the war, you're getting freedom. So that will to fight is just a little bit